morning. Thank you for joining the Capital Region chapter of PRSA for a third annual Women in Public Relations panel discussion, but our first one held virtually. I'm Heather Schechter, the chapter's membership chair and a past president. If you are interested in learning more about our membership, you can connect with me or one of our board members or visit our website. I am also the Director of Marketing and Business Development for Sunrise Management and Consulting. We manage apartments in the Capital Region and have a passion for building great communities for our residents. Thank you to Sunrise for the use of the Zoom webinar account for today's event. In past years, we've held the Women in PR panel at Urban Coworks, a co-working space in Schenectady, and they had planned to let us hold the 2020 event there too. Thank you to Urban Coworks for your generosity in allowing us in the past to use your beautiful space. We're so sorry we couldn't take you up on it this year. This year, I'm so excited to be joined by three women whose careers involve public relations, a field that is often misunderstood. Many think of public relations as just media relations or sending out information through different channels. The Public Relations Society of America defines public relations as the strategic communication process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and their publics, also known as key stakeholders. That is the definition we will use during this discussion. I am now excited to introduce our panelists. Richie Hunter, Vice President for Strategic Communications and External Relations of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Nicole Snow, founder and CEO of Darn Good Yarn, and Darcy Wells, Communications Director for the New York State AFL-CIO. Their full bios are available on our website, and I'm going to ask them to tell you more about themselves. Richie, Nicole, and Darcy, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. So I'll kick it off and talk a little bit about my background real quick. And I remember when Heather approached me to be on the panel, and I'm like, I don't do PR. And she's like, no, you do. And she actually had to go back to the definition that you just provided, Heather. So I think it provides such a nice framework for this conversation. But for those of you that don't know me, I'm the founder and CEO of Darn Good Yarn. We are a direct consumer brand. I work with about 600 artisans between India and Nepal, and most of our products are made from reclaimed material. Our whole reason for existence is actually to be a conduit to provide sustainable employment to people that are dealing with gender, caste, religious, and racial oppression within those countries. So we've been around for about 12 years. 2 years ago, we were named one of the fastest growing companies. Well, we were the fastest growing company in the Capital Region. And I think like a lot of other small business owners in the area, going through COVID and in light of all of the current events as well, we've just seen our companies completely transform. I think the word pivot is used a lot. I like to go with the idea of evolving because we're still who we always are. We haven't forgotten that. We're just telling our message in a whole different way. So I'm really excited to be here today.
Thank you. Nicole, I'm sorry. Darcy, would you?
So I work for the New York State AFL-CIO. I'm the communications director. And I think sometimes people get us confused. I know they do because reporters do it all the time, as I think of us as a union. But we're not a union, we are a federation. And sometimes I explain it this way: if you think of the United Nations and they have all these different countries, that's kind of what our role is. We have 3,000 different affiliates. So that's 3,000 different unions, and they represent workers in the public sector, in the private sector, and in the building trades. And it comprises 2.5 million members that we represent, because we represent not only the workers, but the retirees and their families. And our mission is to fight for better wages, for better benefits, and for better working conditions, which of course throughout this whole pandemic has been key. So from day one, we were in it, trying to keep workers safe and get the message out on how they could get information, and we continue to do that. This is evolving a process as this whole pandemic has evolved, and I'm happy to be here and join all of you.
Thank you so much. And
Thank you. So my role is at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. I'm the Vice President for Strategic Communications and External Relations, and it covers a range of different disciplines within public relations. So marketing, branding, communications, internal, external, and crisis, including crisis management, as well as government relations, community relations, state relations, and federal relations. Additionally, events falls under my realm of responsibility, and all digital assets from a design perspective. So you can imagine in communicating not only with so many different stakeholders, but at the university, once we went into New York pause, we had to get everyone off of the campus. And so we have been communicating in various forms, and our area with strategic communications and external relations has become a true center of excellence, number one, and of responsibility in terms of keeping this community together. Looking forward to our conversation today.
thank you so much. In planning for this evolving pandemic and the tensions intensified after the death of George Floyd, what changes do you foresee in the way we need to communicate and build relationships with key stakeholders? Nicole, would you start that off?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when I went into COVID, and I feel like I've done a few of these webinars, and if anyone's been following through, like, it's very transparent in what's happened at Darn Good Yarn, that originally I probably needed Darcy and Richie at my company because it was more like the sky is falling. Everyone get your stuff, get out of the building, and I'll call you in a week when we figure it out. So we were definitely in a free fall for a little bit. As we've progressed and evolved as a company, though, going through the pandemic and now looking at the events and the amazing movements within, like, Black Lives Matter and all of this coming from George Floyd's death, it's been an evolutionary period for my team as we start to say, okay, we need to, like, go back to what our whole marketing, what our whole reason for existence is. We were already going through a rebranding. I was like, hey, we're doing a pandemic. Let's also do a rebrand as well. It'll add to the fun, I guess, which I'm being totally sarcastic when I talk about that. If anyone has gone through a rebrand, it's like one of the most fallacious things ever. But we, as a company, because we're direct to consumer, it's very easy to fall in the trap of being very sales oriented, like buy our stuff, buy our stuff, buy our stuff. So we were already starting to peel that back and say, what is really our mission? What has our mission always been about? And having these very deep conversations and educational series with my employees, say, this is why we market the way we do. And let's get back into the psychology and really having them question the why of why we do things. So it's not enough to just put a sale out. Like, why are we doing this? Well, for this particular yarn, for example, this is providing 100 jobs within Southern India. And we need to be able to tell the story of these people that we directly work with. So it's been a real opportunity for re-education of my team, because it's very easy to just give people to-do lists, like, go do this, go communicate with our customer this way, go build out macros within customer service. And people really forget why we're here. So for us, it's sort of been a rebirth of getting back to our roots and having very real and honest conversations, like what the company was founded on. So we've used it as a real opportunity during this time.
Thank you so much. Darcy?
Well, for us, this happened so quickly for all of us, right? And all of a sudden you're working at home, everybody's working at home, but we had to be aware of all of our different members from all of the different sectors, who was going to become an essential worker all of a sudden. We all expect that with emergency first responders, whether it's police, firefighters, or who that might be. But now all of a sudden you had grocery store workers who were essential workers and who were on the front lines. So it was really a matter of immediately getting the information that we needed to get to them about safety, what their rights were, We had so many people concerned. People were already sick, and many of our members had died. We represent people who work for the MTA on the subways, and compiling that information all in one location and making sure that we had it there, and transparency too for the public. Anybody who wanted to go and look at that, it was there. Constantly updating that, finding out the best way to get that information out to folks. We recently started a podcast. It's been a year now, but using that tool to get people information any way we can through email. But we just wanted to make sure it was there. We were a resource. They needed to know that we were this resource. And we continue to do that now with updates, whether it's filing for unemployment, workers' compensation. If you're injured, what about concerns going back to work? What is that going to look like? So we were kind of that clearinghouse for information. And then internally as well. One day we were all in the office. All of a sudden we're all, at home. I was the voice that said, when we have meetings, and you might have this at your own place, sometimes it tends to be the upper level management, but we had to be inclusive for everyone. Because no matter where they were in the food chain, everybody wanted the same information. What's going to happen? What about my job? So we had to make sure we were all inclusive on those meetings and not overdoing it, right? Not having too many meetings, too many Zooms, or too many conference calls, but at least making sure everyone was included. And I'll just close with, that also meant the downtime and having the virtual happy hours with coworkers. And at first we were wondering about that, but you know what? People wanted that connection. They wanted to see their coworker. They wanted to have that, out of work time to just say, hey, how are you coping with this, and have that exchange. So we continue to do that as well.
Thank you so
Darcy,
much.
I don't mean to jump in, but Darcy, it's such a good point about inclusion with staff. I know with my team, we actually went to, I was sharing our P&L on a day-by-day basis of this is where our sales numbers need to be, and actually explaining to everyone what that meant. And think about from someone who's working in our warehouse, by example, where they don't know where things are landing and having that level of uncertainty. So I knew that we were communicating and again, educating, and then because I could just say, yeah, this is our cash flow right now. And that's what I'm in all day. So having my CFO come in, communicate, teach, and then say, this is where we're at. And it's been amazing to have that level of inclusion where normally that's the stuff that's happening C-suite, right? And then we say, we're just going to open it all up. And now to see even my warehouse team say, we're going to take responsibility for sales as well and try to think of really innovative ways. And that's been part of the reason that we're being propped up during this time. So Richie, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's a good point. The balance of internal and external relations and those different publics.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So at Rensselaer, you can imagine a university is much like a small city. So we deal with all of the issues with so many different stakeholders and the responsibility of so many lives. So after we got through, I should back up. We actually sent our first communication about COVID-19 on January 22nd. So we were in very early. We have people, our researchers, who are working on different types of interventions, whether they are drug interventions, personal protection equipment that we have built, that we have made, sanitation devices that we've used and sent to our partners at Mount Sinai, as well as locally here at Albany Med and Samaritan. So we're very integrated in actually fighting COVID-19. From a communications perspective, we had to get those stories out. And we were really excited very early on when the White House announced that Rensselaer would be one of the key academic partners in fighting COVID-19 and using our supercomputer that's located out at the tech park. And so we've been extraordinarily integrated. From a communications perspective, as I mentioned earlier, we became the hub. But as everyone knows, this pandemic has grown into other crises. And what's different for me and my team is that usually when we're dealing with a crisis, and that's on a continual basis, it doesn't affect everyone at one time. And these crises have. And so I've made 3 observations that I'd like to share with everyone in terms of what's different this time And what do brands have to do? And I'm going to just read a little bit of it. So the first thing is that it's no longer if companies or brands should take a stance on issues that are impacting society, but how they'll do it. Brands who've opted out have made a decision. So what did Rush say? If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. That is true today. And that means the Great Rush Band, not a company. The second thing is that this trifecta, what do we have? We have a global pandemic, we have a recession with record unemployment, and we have societal unrest related to the murder of George Floyd. And because of that, we have a lot of people that are out of work or that have created a lot of extra work for people in communications because they have time to get deeply involved in every issue, and we have to manage accordingly. And so the brands must listen to what's going on, what people are saying, and watch these actions, and then measure responses with purpose. And then the third thing is that intent beats inaction. Not everything that anyone does is going to be perfect. You won't get it always right the first time. But when brands acknowledge and show vulnerability and commit to action, they're faring much better than brands that are acting like nothing is going on.
Wow, that was fantastic. Thank you. Those were great insights.
Yeah, it's very good.
Yeah. So what new skills do we need to keep up with the directions public relations is going and in light of current events? Darcy, would you kick that one off?
Sure. I think a lot of it, at least for me, from my experience, is it's all about video. I mean, video is able to show emotion. It's always been a very strong tool for communications to begin with, and storytelling, which is key to public relations. So I would say video skills. I know for myself, we were about to launch an ad campaign, and suddenly we couldn't do that in person, right? So we had to figure out, how can we do this video and interview these people? And we did it over Zoom. And I think it was just as powerful. So I had to learn that skill. And I think that our principals have to learn these new skills as well. And that is how to come across, how to keep things concise, and for them to also be aware of their audience when they're speaking, whether it's internal communications or external, and using things to their advantage. Like I didn't mention this at the beginning, but I come from a background in broadcast television. I was there for 13 years, and then I did radio for 6 years. And one thing that I learned from that, and it was very hard to do, is to watch myself. And they used to tell you and listen to yourself, and we're our own worst critic. So it's hard to do that because you see things other people don't see. But I think that that's something for our principals to keep in mind now. They're going to need to learn those new skills. And I always have encouraged them throughout the jobs I had. When they do interviews, take the time. And usually the answer you get immediately is no, I don't want to. I don't need to see it. It's done. Few. But they do need to, because they can learn from that. So I would say the skill of video, but then also anything digital, everything online. We think about how we're getting information now through emails. Most people aren't on their computers. They're getting those emails on their phone, on tablets. So formatting that so that it's in an easy readable format on a smaller device. So whether you had those skills or not before, thinking of what that's going to look like using graphics. So anything digital and online absolutely are going to be new skills we're going to need.
That's great.
Yeah, Darcy, I was going to actually say the exact same thing. It's all about digital. It's all about video. But it's also about being, and so I'll add a few things. It's staying so hyper organized and in tune with what's going on so that you make those vehicles work for you. Because, and to stay relevant and engaged, and we have these rules, all the time, but it becomes more intense when we're in a situation like COVID-19.
It's true. The news is changing daily so quickly, and it's important to keep up. Nicole?
We had revision. So I feel like I'm like with two professionals again. I'm coming from running a company, and it's a little bit different, but for small business owners out there, what we've done, like sort of boots on the ground, is we've revised actually a lot of our personas. So generally, I think we were broad and we had our idea of what this customer looked like, you know, depending on what their life cycle might be. And we started to have these conversations, like we were seeing very weird sales data, like very late at night on Wednesdays. And so looking at the data and saying, okay, what's the information we can extract from this, right? And say, you know what, we should be communicating maybe on Wednesdays, you're a mom and you're like scrolling through on your phone because you've been on Zoom calls all day, thinking about then tactics to speak at that point, at that level, to where and meet your customer at that place. And, you know, it is a stakeholder, right? No matter who you're talking to. And so that's been an interesting change for us, because we've had to really kind of go back. I think persona generation is a really interesting and kind of weird tool to do sometimes. And then you say, okay, like what are people doing in their houses? Well, okay, all during the day, they're on Zoom calls, they're totally fatigued. Is the next thing they want to do actually going on like a Zoom at night when they're really trying to watch their kids and they're trying to juggle 17 other things. So making our media as quick to ingest as possible. And then the other two other points is staying very authentic. I know that when we actually got too polished up, and Richie, you made this really great point in your opening, is like just the intent, and then trying to then say, okay, like what was the feedback I got from this, and going with that. I think, you know, and I'm even guilty of it, of trying to make it like so perfect and really figure out where we stand and how to communicate it, because you just watch, like, you know, sometimes it can backfire. And I think there's this place where, you know, you just keep moving forward, but with caution, so that you're really telling, you're creating this community of customers. I mean, we have a cult following at Darn Good Yarn. The other thing that we've done that's helped, because we're all work from home, and so I have a lot of different people that touch our marketing, including contractors, and we're all around the world. So we've overlaid in our marketing calendar, we've gotten into like the grittiness of like how we're engaging our customers and laying that in and answering those questions on a day-by-day basis. So that's been an interesting transition, because generally it has just been more of a promotional calendar, but getting into more of the warm fuzzies of building community and looking at, I guess, the customer and their experience as much more holistic, and remembering that, you know, on Instagram when we're posting, we're in a scroll with hardcore real life events happening. Like, and if you just come out of left field, you're going to look like an idiot. So being very methodical and remembering like where your items will be ingested in the current environment, and being very thoughtful about that.
Nicole, you know what you say about authenticity, I love that, because it's something that we always work towards, right? So it's something that we're always trying to present. But in public relations, in marketing and branding, we have been guilty of being too glossy. We've been so perfect. But I actually think that the news media led and paved the way for us, because when the news media could no longer have people in studios, we started seeing people doing WebEx from home, Zooms from home, and it gave us license to then not aim for this perfect glossy video and look. And it allowed us as practitioners to be more timely so that we could jump in there. And universities are notorious for this. When you're able to get the university president, the university cabinet to get on a Zoom and do a town hall virtually, it is night and day from anything that would have happened a year ago. Mm-hmm. And I love it, because it means that we're going to be fast, we're going to be quick, we're going to be smart, we're going to be aware, we're not going to be tone deaf, we're going to work towards those things, all the things that you described, but they hit us all. And I think the news media paved the way. We'll also leave from here with tools that we'll continue to use beyond the global pandemic, beyond the current societal unrest, you know, beyond, you know, this unemployment, you know, situation that we have, that we'll be able to, we've been able to become smarter in this period.
Mm-hmm.
That's such a great point. I feel like there's so many things that are now done virtually, like board meetings and stuff, that seem so much more efficient through Zoom than they did in person. So thank you for those insights. All right, there are reports that COVID-19 is affecting women's careers differently from men's careers. So I shared a couple of article links in the Q&A panel, and I'm going to discuss them. So according to an article on NPR's website, previous recessions affected men's employment more than women's, but the recession from the coronavirus is causing higher unemployment among women. A professor from Northwestern University who is quoted attributes this to two factors. One, the coronavirus hitting industries hardest that have traditionally had high female employment, like restaurants, hotels, and hospitality. And two, lack of childcare. Has a lack of childcare or an increase in unpaid labor due to home responsibilities like grocery shopping been a hindrance for you or your coworkers? And how have you or they handled that? And do you have any ideas on how women could pivot to another industry if needed, or how to get women back to work? Richie, would you kick that off?
I sure will. You know, it's interesting because even without COVID-19, when I was raising young children, I have two sons. They are, both, one's in college and one is out of college. Childcare was the biggest stressor, even without COVID-19. And when I speak with other friends of mine, other female executives, and we talk about what was the period like when we were raising young children, and it was always a primary stressor in terms of that. I think that now, and I have a team of people where, half of them have young children that are in elementary school, some have brand new babies. And the key to helping them lies in flexibility. Mm-hmm. And because of the flexibility, actually being at home in one way has been easier with childcare, but they've taken on so many other duties in the home. And these are some of the things that the articles also spoke about. So I think that as a leader, as a manager, you have to be able to begin to understand where flexibility lies if it's not already part of your culture, and how it could help in terms of making sure that in this particular case, that women are able to fully participate. In terms of moving from industry to industry, and I've been in 3 different industries: financial services, healthcare, and higher education. But the thing that I have done that's throughout is to make sure that my functional expertise and my transferable skills were always sharp, honed, and the ability to pivot was being able to learn in those industries. So it's part of being a lifelong learner. It's part of not letting your skills get stale. And it's part of being interested in understanding how your skills can fit into a different industry, and into a different role.
Those were great tips. Thank you. Nicole?
That's great. I think you bring up so many great points, Richie, and I think that being able to be flexible. So like I have my team, and I know you always know like who has the little kids running around. Like I have a 3-year-old. I know that in the morning is sacred ground. Like I need my coffee that my husband brought to me while we were prepping for this, but like there is just time where I can get things done. And I think we've all sort of found maybe those pockets. I've taken it to a place, and I've been playing around successfully with saying, you know what, my thinking time, the meetings that are really important where I need my brain power turned on, I need to schedule when everyone is sleeping. And it's early. Like I have appointments on my calendar at 6 a.m. and we just do it and they're done for the day. That's a hard transition, but it is one of the only ways I can secure, okay, I'm going to get at least the highest priority items done. And I do find really like within 4 hours, I'm able to consolidate my 8 hours of playing Office. It sometimes feels like I play Office into this time. The other thing I've done is putting up an autoresponder. It's like it's something I took from Tim Ferriss years ago, like with his 4-hour work week. But it's just putting up an autoresponder saying, you know what? And it's funny. I made it funny. It's like, where's Nicole? She never answers her emails because I'm notorious for that. But it's like, I answer them between 5 a.m. and 9 a.m. And if you don't hear from me for the rest of the day, you better text me if it's urgent. Otherwise, you're not going to hear from me. And like, I'm starting to draw those boundaries as well. I think women, like, I work with mostly women. So it's like, I watch and say, okay, I could do a little more here and a little more here. And I've had requests to do even these sort of events at 7 o'clock at night. And I'm like, no, like, that's my time with my family, because then I know that I'm then making that boundary. Okay, mommy's on a call right now, but come 5 o'clock, I'm all yours. And that kind of diffuses things a little bit. And I'm not saying it's easy. It is very difficult. The other thing that just to maybe get people's juices thinking, if you're thinking about moving industries, is that it's a global market. So that you're on the East Coast right now, if you find that maybe your core time that you can get work done is the 5 a.m. to 10 a.m. bucket, which again, I know sounds gnarly, but it's not that bad. Like it takes a couple weeks to get into it. You can go find contract work in the UK or somewhere else around the world that really requires that 24/7 interaction, monitoring and things like that. So I think there's ways to get very creative and not just think capital region in terms of where can my skills be utilized. So putting that out there. I mean, Upwork for me, I use and work with people all around the world just so I have that 24/7 exposure. And I think more companies that are making that transition into work from home, limiting their actual employees, I think they're going to start looking for these professionals. So if you haven't, and even if you're considering it, getting your profile looking awesome on Upwork is probably like a really quick thing to do, making sure your headshot looks good and that it's just as polished as your LinkedIn and making sure that those two are working together.
Thank you so much. Darcy?
Well, my children are grown and been out of the home for a long time. So to be completely honest, when this first hit, I was oblivious to it, what people were dealing with, until I suddenly saw my coworkers struggling like with their little kids. And I thought, I can't imagine that already, never mind the fact that also they're out of school and you've got that responsibility as well. But Richie, you're right, though. I do remember when my kids when I had to find childcare and how stressful that was. And it was, really when you first got pregnant and start searching and, having that flexibility. And back then, employers were not as understanding. So I think if something good can come out of all of this, it's that it's not only all of us or the moms who do have kids at home who are dealing with this, but so are the executives. We've seen the stories of the news anchor where the child pops in on the screen and everybody can relate to that. So now executives hopefully can understand as well, whether they're a man or a woman, to see that is important and it's stressful and people want their careers and should be able to have their careers and raise their families and do these other things as well. And it's also, we know from public relations, and I'm sure Nicole is a business owner, there's not a 9 to 5 in public relations, and it's, all the time, anytime, and you have to be ready. So I think for those doubters of whether this could be done, it's been proven that yes, we can do this, and work from home. It just might be, like you said, doing it very early in the morning or doing work at night, but it can get done. As far as, Richie, you mentioned this about transferring your skills. That's absolutely true. And I found this when I went from being in the news business and going into public relations. I was looking for a change and I thought, well, what can I do? I know broadcast journalism, but what do I do with that? And sometimes we're so close to it, we might not see things. And I think it could be helpful for women to talk to other people or to even write down, well, what are all the different things that I do in my job? And someone else who knows you well might say, well, you talk about this and you do this. So for example, I could have used my skills with knowing how to do an interview and storytelling. And maybe I didn't go to public relations. Maybe I went to a recruiter type job because I know how to pull information out of people. So I think if women sit there and think about it, what they're doing right now, there's probably a lot of skills you just take for granted. And if you really look at them and match them up with other jobs, there's probably a lot of opportunities out there, particularly now when you can do those jobs from home.
That's great advice. People in college to find the career that they're interested in. I was a history major in college and loved writing, loved reading, communicating, and I didn't really know about public relations, and someone recommended that career for me. So that's great advice. Bring your skills list to someone who might be able to help you. Okay, an article in Fast Company contains some hope for the future, which is that instead of the workplace returning to normal, there may be some permanent changes at work. According to the article, the old normal was discrimination persists in the workplace, everywhere, against gender, race, sexuality, physical and neuroability, age, and caregiver status, despite companies' commitments to inclusion. says that 87% of dads believe that women will have more professional opportunities, particularly after childbirth, because of remote working. Do you see companies moving towards a more remote workforce and that providing an increase in opportunities for women in the future? And how might the move to remote work affect opportunities for people whose job involves communications or marketing? Nicole, would you start that one for us?
Yeah, I can tell you that we, as a company, we're moving heavily towards a model of having a remote workforce. We were doing it a little bit, and now we're doing it a lot of it. Like to the point where I had 21 employees at the start of this year, and right now I have 8. And we're continuing to look for ways to outsource all of our future growth. It's just from an economic standpoint, it's just a lot of risk to have when you look at overhead and inconsistencies within the economy. One of the ways, at least as a small business, to hedge against volatility is to say, okay, like going back to old school, like batten down the hatches style of management, which it's draconian, but it ensures that we're there the next day as well. So we are definitely moving to, I mean, I don't foresee us going back into our office anytime soon, even in Half Moon. We like all meet in like once a week, but it's very floating. I think in terms of opportunities for people in communications and marketing to move to a digital space, I mean, it's being done. For the past 12 years, I've been in the digital space. I think that if you're just starting to look at it, like Richie, you were talking about continuing ed, like you have to really jump on that and find, and I'd be curious, like from other panelists here, like what are maybe some resources you follow? Because I follow, like everyone talks about Gary Vaynerchuk by example, but if you really break down even how he's used his voice digitally to a mass place, and then sort of dissecting who the lead digital marketers are, I think there's a lot to be taken from that. And I will tell you that small companies, you know, and large alike, are looking for taking everything to digital. I mean, that's just what it is. I mean, I had a retail store. I'm not reopening my retail store, so I need to make sure that I'm making up for sales in other ways. And I think from a hiring standpoint, is finding people that are going to help me not just look at data. I talked about data versus information before, but help me make actionable plans and help me move and keep people accountable in a work from home environment. That's going to be critical. So I think that there's even this leadership capability. Like if you've led a marketing department and you know how to keep creatives responsible and you can do it in this work from home environment, there's like that kind of, I don't want to say soft skill, but it is a little bit, that is going to be incredibly important to companies like mine, because usually you have to think like, again, going back to that persona generation, like what's happening in these sort of weird, these weird little spots that have to still be filled in. In an office environment, I can walk down the hallway and say, hey, Colleen, do you have that done? That's not happening anymore. It's happening in Slack a little bit, but it's not the same. So someone who has those leadership abilities and can drive real change and keep it aligned with strategic marketing plans is going to thrive in that environment. And I have people on my team right now that they're just rising up to that occasion. And I'm like, damn, I didn't hire for that. I'm so glad you have that as like this part, being part of your resume. And I think that will be very important.
Thank you. Darcy?
I think that there were a lot of companies, corporations, and government agencies who would always shy away from letting people work from home because they didn't trust and they were unsure if it could work. And I think if this has taught us nothing else, it's proven that yes, it can work. And I think it's been very successful across industries. So I also have concerns though, because, and actually something that you mentioned even, Nicole, if we have fewer people going in to the office, you know, what happens with smaller businesses? What happens to the coffee shops and the restaurants and the bars that people might stop at on the way home? Like, what's that going to mean for our economy? Because I do think that we are going to see a trend toward working from home. I think we've just proven, you know, that it can work and be functional. And there's probably a cost savings to a lot of companies to have people work from home. So I think we're definitely going to see it. I think it can be done. I think it can be done well. And it's all about that flexibility again, and probably quality of life for all of us, and being able to, take care of things at home as well, and people understanding that that's all good. But then how are we going to adjust for those businesses that people might not be visiting because they're not leaving their home? And so that concerns me.
I think the American entrepreneur, this is where they thrive. And I've been on so many other business calls, like with entrepreneurs who've started multiple companies, and it is about evolving. So when you talk about the coffee shop and what happens to them, coffee shops weren't really even a thing in like the 90s. Like Starbucks wasn't really a thing where people went to go camp out. And it was just the evolving economy. It's up to the business, and it's up to capitalism, I think, to some point, to be able to look at the needs of the customer. Just in the same way we're doing these persona generation studies and saying, okay, what's happening with our customer in these moments? I think the onus is on all small business owners and large business owners to say what's happening. Like the consumer is going to change. I mean, we should all know 65% of online commerce happens on Amazon.com. That's a behavioral shift. Watch what happens with groceries. Like it's going to be these behavioral shifts, and the onus is on the entrepreneur, the American entrepreneur, to see those shifts and then come up with really amazing, amazing advancements within whatever industry they're serving. I think it's actually a true opportunity for economic growth. That's how we get technology. I think I look at some of the models, and we look at disruptors and how I think we've like almost forgotten like what disruption does to the economy. Look at what Uber did. That was not there 10 years ago. And it's a humongous company, right? I think that we will continue to find very interesting disruptions coming out of our American entrepreneur system.
We've definitely been disrupted at this time. Normal operations. Thank you, Richie.
Yeah, I agree with what both of the panelists, my fellow panelists have said. I want to take a different approach though. So I've been working in some mode of remote outside of when I returned to higher ed, but for 10 years in healthcare. And we worked across distances while we all went into an office. We worked with people, all across the country for many years. And the thing that I think now that working remotely, it is going to become more common, at a minimum, a hybrid of that, beyond some of the early adopting industries. But what I like to posit is that there's also going to be a responsibility for people to be able to effectively develop relationships remotely, to collaborate, and particularly when we have creatives, right? And so in some of our shops, we have people that are working on creative collateral that oftentimes requires a level of collaboration that's different because, it's an iron sharpens iron type of situation where people get together and they make each other better. And so remote working, I think there's so many positives, but there will be challenges, particularly in our industries, on certain levels where people will have to develop additional skills. People that are not used to being vocal in meetings. And while they're very good, maybe they're more introverted, you can't, when you're doing a video meeting or if it's on the phone call, you can become lost. And from a leadership perspective, I want to make sure that as we move to different modalities of communicating, of working together, that great talent isn't overlooked because the mode doesn't meet isn't the exact match for a person. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of responsibility leadership-wise as well as individual contributor-wise.
That's a great coaching opportunity for someone. If someone feels that they're not great on Zoom calls, to use their marketing and communications background to help coach people.
Yes, that's really great. You're right. That is. See, that true entrepreneur, you're already coming up with businesses.
I'll help whoever run it. We'll do a business model canvas. It'll be fun.
Oh, we definitely have people who work in our public relations area who focus on that coaching. So that's great.
But this is the opportunity, Heather. These are these micro instances that I think people have to think like marketers all the time. Like this, like, okay, this is just a half-assed idea that throwing out there, but people are dealing with this. And then we say, okay, how as an entrepreneur or a small business owner, you say, okay, I'm going to meet a need. And like the customer doesn't even really know it's an issue yet, but I see this and it's coming out of just, you know, Zoom exhaustion. How do you fight that and still be an effective communicator? Or if you're introverted or more creative, I think there's a ton of opportunity and it will transform. A lot of industries have long embraced this. So I think we're all just catching up.
And along with, you know, this focus on communication. So how does a focus on public relations help your organization meet its strategic goals? And how do we make sure companies continue to see PR as an integral component of their success? Nicole?
Yeah, Richie, you said it before, like if you're not doing anything, you're still doing something. I think that there were a couple of things that like I look back at my sort of running a business and having it grow. And I used to not think HR was important. And I used to not think communications and PR were important. I thought they were like these fluffy things. I'm just honest, like maybe I didn't do well at them in school or something like that. And it's, you know, I look back and I'm like, that's cringeworthy now because they're so freaking important. And I think as we move forward, to the point I made before about how even we're overlaying and thinking about our promotional schedule and what blogs we're writing and how we're talking to our customers, and even down to the point of saying, you know, you have some customers that they're the Karens out there. I'm sorry to all the Karens on the call. I feel really bad that the memes are out there, but I think we attract 95% of them on the internet at Darn Good Yarn. And how do you not reward that behavior, but then reward your customers that are being advocates for you? And then, okay, now it starts the conversation of, okay, customer service team, we need to like train you in human psychology and so you can jujitsu this a little bit. That's a complete foundational shift to how we've talked to our customers before. And I think bringing on, like I have a communications director now, bringing her in, continuing to have open conversations and not just saying, okay, we did this as a checklist item and now we're going to move on. I think that's actually one of the worst things you can do. It needs to be integrated into process now on a continual basis. This is why we're actually putting it front and center in our marketing calendar, because that's like our Bible. That's what runs really the back end of the company. That's why we chose that document. But having it so front facing so that all of your stakeholders internally are always seeing it, and then continuing to strategize. And again, using the data, seeing what people are saying and saying, okay, how can we make this even better and even better?
Thank you. Darcy?
Well, I think it's taught us if you didn't have a crisis management or crisis plan in place, this was the time to find that out, right? So I think that it shows the value of public relations. So many companies, all of a sudden, it was such a quick shift. And how are they going to communicate? They need the public relations folks. We're the ones that know how to do that. So I think it has taught companies and agencies, nonprofits, whoever it is, corporations, that having public relations up front and being a part of the management team at the top level and know what's going on so that they're not trying to catch up to speed later when a crisis does come about. Even if they're that just fly on the wall getting the information so that they know there's less bringing up to speed. It's so important. And then as far as the continued value, you've got to be able to use the measurement. You've got to be able to show the data. And I think sometimes in public relations, we might have that and share it with our own team, but it's the folks at the top who need to see that, you know, look, this podcast is reaching this many people, or look, this video ad worked, or, you know, gee, your idea over here didn't get that interaction that you thought it would, which is why now we know we're going to go in this direction instead. So really using that measurement to have something concrete to hand over and say, we have something that we can look at, we can evaluate and decide how that can be used in the best way moving forward.
Thank you.
You know, in addition to what Darcy and Nicole have said, what I'll add is that we have to know how to tie to the key business outcomes. And so part of that requires understanding the business and not only what we do and how we measure it, but why it matters. And so connecting that. And when you think about public relations and the definition, Heather, that you shared at the beginning, it's all about relationships. And there's not a business that is not about relationships in some way, shape, or form. So public relations should be right front and center of any type of success measurement. And we have to make sure that we continue to make those ties with people and that people understand that value and is communicating it in a way that the business understands.
Thank you so much. What single piece of advice would you offer a new practitioner or someone contemplating a career that involves public relations? Darcy?
I think you can start by right here at the Public Relations Society of America. If you're considering public relations, this is where you need to be, whether it's going to an event, getting involved, meeting those people. I mean, it's a great networking opportunity. You'll find that people involved in PRSA, the local chapter, they know companies that are hiring. You're going to meet other people in the business. That's definitely a starting ground. For someone who's just starting out, I think you can usually recognize a leader when you go into a new environment, and I would shadow that person. You can learn from them. You want to make sure that you're stepping up and offering to take on new challenges, and don't be afraid of mistakes. I mean, obviously, especially with a new job, you don't want to be making them, but we all also know you learn the most from those mistakes. And then something just little that I had learned is when I was a reporter, you'd write a story. I had control of that. No one was changing it. But then all of a sudden, the other side, I'm writing something and people are crossing out this and changing that and tweaking this. And I was offended at first because I didn't understand the whole process. So don't fall in love with your own words. Because when you take a step back, you say, oh yeah, that did make it better. Oh, that's, so you have to be able to do that and let other people weigh in to get that final best product.
Yes, public relations is definitely a reciprocal process, and accepting the feedback, incorporating it, and using it. So important. Richie.
Okay, so first of all, I'm writing that down. Don't fall in love with your own words. That is a really hard. We have to discuss this almost on a weekly basis with, someone within our discipline. So I love that. I would say a couple of things. Number one, and I echo, joining organizations like PRSA, making sure that you're developing relationships because you're going to need these people and they need you. There's a lot that people can learn from each other. So first thing, stay curious, keep learning, keep strengthening your skills. And one thing that I find that people are doing while we move to digital, some people are forgetting about the basics. So in my business, you have to be able to write well. Write some more. And how do you strengthen writing? By reading, read some more. And then I'll also echo, really understand your business. Because when we start thinking that all we are is a functional expertise where people say, do this, and we take the order, we're order takers, but we're not critical thinkers who add to the business, that's where we start making our first mistakes of being marginalized, not only as individuals, but as a discipline. So those are my suggestions.
Great one.
It's never too early or late to start these things.
Richie, I say this I had this conversation, I feel, once a week where I said, there are so many great digital marketing practitioners out there, but they're not marketers, and don't get them fooled. And I yearn for old school marketers that know how to use digital, and not age wise, but just sort of going back to those basics. And it's such a rare thing. So if you're a good marketer, learn the digital. But then I think the other tip is learning how to communicate with leadership at the company. So Richie, you talked about understanding what the key indicators are and what's needed to drive that organization or company. Being in the position of PR communications, I think it's important to make sure that you're working with leadership to make sure that those needs are continually being met. And this is why it's good for the organization. And just because I feel like it's one of these things that it can very easily become a checkbox. This is why partially why we're having some of these issues and why companies are having, why we're needing crisis control right now, is because it did just become a checkbox. And I think there's a real opportunity for people in this space to step up and be big leaders in ways that, like, it's not just about operations and getting orders out the door, or things that I think have gotten more fluff and bravado within the four walls of a company. I think that I feel like I have to extract that sometimes, but it would be refreshing to have that sort of work the opposite way. Like, this is important. Like, when my CFO tells me that we're not profitable in something, she's in my face about it. I want to see that same level coming in from communications and PR side of what we do on the day-to-day.
I'm going to just take a couple questions that were written in. So, as women, do you feel that we're well positioned to react to the immediate changes thrown our way with the tumultuous events currently being presented daily?
Absolutely. As women, right, ladies, we've always had to juggle a million things at once. There's, you know, whether it's the kids, the grocery shopping, the home, whatever, we've always had to figure that out. So I think it absolutely comes natural for us. And I don't know if the men want to accept that or admit that, but for the most part, generally speaking, we are multitaskers. We always have been. It's our strength, I think.
Absolutely. And I mean, the answer absolutely with a period at the end, for the reasons that Darcy just shared, but also we are able, and I'm not saying that men can't do this, but women, we've been known to be more empathetic. We've been known to hone our EQ skills as much as our IQ skills. And I think that plays a really important role these days as we all become more authentic humans, authentic in our interaction, and authentic in understanding the positions and perspectives of others. And I know a lot of really great men who are able to do the same, but I will say that I think it's a specific skill set that many women have.
And the only thing I would add on to that is just make sure you put boundaries in on that. Like, the worst thing to do is overload, saying I can do it all. And like, yeah, you probably can, but the last thing you want to do is have a crappy product because you've done like 80% on 100% of your output. Like, it's refreshing to me when someone says, you know what, Nicole, I actually can't add that on to my workload. Like, we need to find someone else to do this. It's okay to have those conversations.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I'm someone who always likes to end right on time, so we're about at the end. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Richie Hunter from RPI, Nicole Snow from Darn Good Yarn, and Darcy Wells from the New York State AFL-CIO. Thank you for joining us for the Capital Region Public Relations Society of America's chapter presentation on the Women in Public Relations, our panel discussion. So hopefully next year we can do this event live, but thank you to everyone who was able to join us today. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.